Hi, I'm David McKinster. This is a lecture on Socrates, the backstory. It's applicable for a number of my courses. I'm doing it specifically, though, for the online intro philosophy course. This is material that normally I would cover in lecture in the first few face-to-face meetings for a traditional class. I thought that a video was probably the best way to do this. This is going to have a lot of information. And it's fairly short because I know not everyone likes to sit and watch a long video. So you may want to watch this video more than once, or watch it, stop it, take some notes, write down some questions, and then watch it again. Okay, to begin with, I'm going to tell you a story about ancient Greece, actually predating what we think of as Greek civilization. There is a rich and very, very old goddess tradition that predates the Greek culture that you're probably most familiar with, certainly predates Socrates by thousands of years. At Delphi in Greece, there was a temple dedicated to the goddess Gaia, the most powerful goddess, the goddess who gave birth to the earth and to all the other deities. Eventually, as Greek culture rose, they built a temple to Apollo on the top of that, actually on the top of that temple. But there was a sort of a merging of the two religions. The Gaia religion, the mother goddess, and Apollo, who was associated with intelligence, with reason, with enlightenment, with illumination, and for the later Greeks came to represent divine unity. At Delphi, there was a temple. The chief priestess was an oracle, in fact, probably the most famous oracle in the ancient Mediterranean. An oracle, you probably already know that word. You remember in The Matrix there was a woman called the Oracle who smoked a lot and made cookies and so forth. And what she could do is tell the future, although she didn't always do so in a straightforward way. In the movie The 300, there was an oracle, very melodramatically presented. The notion of an oracle, someone who can tell the future, normally not because of their own powers, but because they are able to channel for a deity, that's universal in ancient religions. Moses is worried about going back to Egypt and trying to persuade the Pharaoh to let the Jews go and persuade the Jews to follow him out into the desert, even though he doesn't know where he's going. And he says, how am I going to do this? I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. And his God tells him, you don't have to. I'm going to speak through you. Okay? There are many instances of people being oracles throughout world religions. Okay, the oracle at Delphi was especially well known in the ancient Mediterranean. She was supposed to be channeling for the god Apollo. Now, there's been a lot of nonsense written about the Delphic oracle in the last 10 years. Someone discovered that there is a cave behind the location of the ancient temple. If you go back far enough in the cave, there are fissures, and every now and then fumes outgas through those fissures. If you were to kneel over the fissure and you were to hotbox, I'm sure you know what that is, it's just inhaling very rapidly, those fumes, you would eventually hallucinate. So having discovered that, some people have decided, well, you see, that explains the Delphic oracle. She was just going back into the cave, hotboxing gases until she flipped out, and then she would come and babble, and people would think she was divinely inspired. Classicists jumped on that immediately and said, that's a solution without a problem. All the accounts of the Delphic oracle have her speaking in a very matter-of-fact way, never in a trance state, never in an ecstatic state, never talking in tongues. Just doesn't fit the facts we know about the Delphic oracle. I make no judgment about how she saw the future or if she saw the future. But these things I am going to tell you. She would give you a very cryptic reply to your question. How you interpreted that reply was a test of your character. It would either, if you understood it, save you, or if you misunderstood it, possibly destroy you. Okay? She, going to put a few terms on the board here. She never went to people like an Old Testament prophet and said, I have something really important for you to know. She simply answered questions that were put to her. And people did not come to her with trivial questions. This is not like reading your daily horoscope. On the old X-Files TV show, Agent Mulder used to say, "Don't open a door unless you really want to know what's on the other side." Okay, well, you didn't ask her questions trivially because she would tell you things that you maybe didn't want to know. One of the icebreakers I asked you was, if you could know the time and date of your own death, would you want to know it in advance? And many of you said, no, I would just obsess about it. It would be too upsetting for me. Well, okay, so that's, that's an illustration of why you would not just ask any old question of the Delphic Oracle. There are things that maybe you'd rather find out for yourself. You'd rather learn from your experience. So as you went in to see the Delphic Oracle, there were two mottos carved at the entrance. You were supposed to keep those mottos in mind, okay, as you asked the question and as the question was answered. One was, know yourself. Know who you are. Know your strengths. Know your weaknesses. Know your limitations. Know your situation. Know your possibilities. And then act in appropriate measure. Some people want to translate that as all things in moderation or act in moderation. The Greeks did not believe you should always be moderate. If there was ever a people on the face of the earth who believed that sometimes you should be bold, even to the point of being reckless, sometimes you should throw yourself headlong into a battle that can't be won simply because it's the right thing to do, surely the ancient Greeks believed that. Act in appropriate measure. How do you know what is appropriate measure? You know yourself. You know who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses, and your situation, and then act appropriately. You had to pass between those two mottos to go in to see the oracle and ask your question. If you kept these two things in mind, what the oracle told you might in fact save you. If you misunderstood them, probably it was because of the vice of hubris. Some people want to translate hubris as pride. I think that is very, very misleading. The Greeks did not believe that pride was a sin. It's post-medieval Christianity that people think of pride as being a vice, okay, because it was one of the 7 deadly sins for the medieval Christians. The Greeks didn't think pride was a vice. In fact, if you weren't proud of your own achievements, of your own virtues, they would think something was wrong with you. How are you going to appreciate excellence in other people if you don't appreciate it in yourself? Today we simply call that self-esteem, okay? So, pride is not a good translation for hubris. Hubris is always a vice. Pride is not always a vice for the Greeks. Hubris is something more like arrogance. You are so full of yourself that you don't know yourself. You don't know your limitations. You misjudge your situation, and so you act in a way that is excessive and destructive or self-destructive. Okay? Hubris will be your undoing. Now, an example of that, one of the most famous ones was a Greek general went to the Delphic oracle because he had decided, there's a possibility I could attack this Persian military force. Now, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Persians were always fighting each other on and off for a very, very long time. But this Greek general did not have the numbers, he didn't have the strategic advantage, he didn't have any reason to believe that he could defeat the Persians if he attacked them, except the element of surprise. Element of surprise isn't necessarily enough. If I walked up to Mike Tyson and slapped him in the face, he'd certainly be surprised. But after that point, it would go very, very badly for me. Actually, only if he noticed it. This general went to the Delphic oracle and asked her, what will happen if I attack the Persians? And the oracle very matter-of-factly replied, a great army will be destroyed. Well, this Greek general was full of himself. He was thinking, oh, a great army will be destroyed. That means I'm going to win. They'll build statues to me. They'll name cities after me. My name will be sung in ballads for centuries after I'm dead. So he attacked the Persians, and a great army was destroyed, but it was his own. Now, if he had kept the mottos of the Delphic oracle in mind, know yourself, and all things in appropriate measure, he would have asked, okay, a great army will be destroyed. She didn't say whose. What should I suppose about this? Do I have the strength? Do I have the numbers? Do I have the experience? Do I have any reason to believe I actually will beat the Persians? No, I just really want to beat the Persians. Okay, or as we might say in modern pop culture lingo, well, it's true for me that I can beat the Persians because I really believe it, and I really want to believe it. Well, unfortunately, that wishful thinking doesn't make anything true. It would be a very, very, very different world. So, why am I telling you all this as backstory for Socrates? There's a very specific reason. A young friend of Socrates went to the Delphic oracle rather, without the knowledge or permission of Socrates, went to the Delphic oracle and asked the oracle, "Is Socrates the wisest man in Greece?" The oracle very matter-of-factly replied, "No man is wiser." Well, this young friend of Socrates was very excited. He ran back to Athens. "Socrates, you're the wisest man in Greece." "That's impossible," Socrates said. "I know I'm an ignorant man. How can I possibly be the wisest man in Greece?" No, really. The god spoke through the oracle and said, "You're the wisest man in Greece." Now, many people hearing that would be exuberantly happy. "Oh, my word. I am as smart as I hoped I was. The gods have said so." You'd maybe even hang out your shingle, "Socrates, wisest man in Greece," start charging people to talk to you, to get your advice, endorsed by Apollo. That's not Socrates. Socrates instead said to his young friend, "Tell me, what exactly did you ask the oracle? And what exactly did the oracle say to you?" "Well, I asked her, 'Is Socrates the wisest man in Greece?' And she said, 'No man is wiser.'" "Well, then you see," said Socrates, "she didn't say I was wise. She just said nobody was any wiser than I am." "Oh, great. You know what you just dropped in my lap, my friend? Through you, the gods have just told me that no one is any wiser than I am." Now, why is that important? At this time, the educational system, the political system, the legal system in Athens was being dominated by people who were called sophists. I'm going to put that on the board. Sophist literally means wise man. These were people who were professional wise men. If that seems like an odd profession, I say go to any Barnes & Noble and walk down the aisles and see how many people are willing to tell you that you, in fact, don't know how to run your own life unless you pay $29.95 and get their book in hardcover. And then you're going to want the desk calendar so you have daily reminders. Then you're going to want to spend several $1,000s to go to their workshop where they essentially will simply recap parts of the book. Right? We do have professional wise men. But expand that. We have political analysts, political advisors, who consult the people who are in fact supposed to be our political leaders and tell them what they ought to say, what they ought to do, how they ought to court the public, how they ought to try to shape public opinion, how they ought to make policy. These people are professional wise men, and that's one of the things, indeed, that the sophists of old did as well. We have people who profess to educate you, okay? What are those if not professional wise men? In Athens, you were required by law to educate your sons. Most people did not educate their daughters, but you were required by law to educate your sons. If indeed you had the money, you would hire a sophist to educate your sons. And in addition to that, if you had to argue a case in court, you would hire a sophist to either teach you to do it yourself or to speak on your behalf. Now, of course, the sophists charged a goodly sum for their services. They made a very good living, just as people in similar circumstances in our own society might in fact make a very good living if they got a good reputation. However, if your income depends upon being perceived to be a wise man, you can't very well admit you're wrong. And the more wrong you are, the more you have to dig in your heels and, if you will, fight dirty in argument to try to make it look as if you're right. In other words, the attempt to figure out what's true, the attempt to find and expose your own errors, has to be abandoned for the sake of your professional reputation. Now, Socrates, on the other hand, always said, if you show me where I'm wrong, you've done me the best favor you can do me. You saved me from my own error. Similarly, in the Old Testament, I believe it's in the book of Proverbs, there's a verse that says, if you rebuke a wise man, he will love you for it. Why? Because if you really do love wisdom, you're going to want to find out your own errors, to expose them, and to correct them. Socrates, historically, is actually the forefather of modern science. Socrates believed that rather than simply stake a claim dogmatically and then defend it at all costs, or speculate about what's right and what's not right, you make a hypothesis, you test it. If it doesn't bear up to scrutiny, you go back and revise it. You continue to do that until you get something that stands up to scrutiny. And if you can't reform your initial hypotheses to make it conform to reality, then you abandon it. You say, you know what, I was wrong. Okay. There's a wonderful play by Bertolt Brecht about Galileo, in which Galileo, in one scene, is visited by emissaries of the church, and is told, stop these experiments to observe sunspots. We're very uncomfortable with that. So he says, okay, fine, go away. The church emissaries leave, and he and his assistants immediately get out their equipment and begin observing sunspots again. In this play, in this scene of the play, Galileo's wife says to him, I can't believe what an egoist you are. You're willing to risk everything just to prove you're right. And Galileo is genuinely astonished. He says, no, not to prove I'm right, to find out whether I'm right. As the Irish philosopher, 18th century Irish philosopher Bishop Berkeley put it, few men think, yet all men hold opinions. The ability to defend your opinion isn't what makes you right. The ability to persuade others isn't what makes you right. Okay? If you've seen the film Thank You for Smoking, you remember the figure of the tobacco lobbyist. He's trying to explain to his son what it is he does for a living. And the son, somewhat horrified at first, says, but Dad, what if you're wrong? And the tobacco lobbyist, seems genuinely puzzled, and he said, but if you win the argument, you're never wrong. And I thought to myself when I saw that film, this is a portrait of a modern-day sophist. The sophists had a sort of informal motto, I can make the weaker argument the stronger argument the weaker, and turn the truth on its head. Does that sound kind of nasty? Well, think of it this way. Supposing you went to a lawyer and you said, I don't know, I really think I ought to be able to sue this person, but my case is kind of flimsy. Can you help me? And the lawyer said, hey, look at my track record. I can make the weaker argument the stronger argument the weaker, and turn the truth on its head. You'd probably put down your deposit right away and say, you're my guy, because I just want to win. If you were a politician and you were hiring a spin doctor to manipulate your image for the public, and the fellow said, look, trust me, I can make the weaker argument the stronger argument the weaker, and turn the truth on its head. You'd probably say, wow, valuable guy. I should hire him right away. There's the problem. Probably all of you have heard attorney jokes, lawyer jokes. Why don't sharks eat lawyers? Professional courtesy, so forth and so forth. I won't recite a whole litany of them. Some of the most embarrassingly insulting lawyer jokes I ever heard were told to me by the associate dean of the law school at the University of Connecticut with a big smile on her face. And I said, do lawyers really feel this way about other lawyers? And she just smiled, and her eyes twinkled, and it was clear that, yep. Well, does that mean that there are no good, principled, decent lawyers? No, it doesn't mean that at all. What it means is that you have the power to persuade people. You have the power to manipulate the institutions to your ends. You have the power either to do very constructive things or very destructive things. And if you don't care about questions of right or wrong, questions about whether you're being benevolent or harmful, then guess what? You can be a very dangerous person. Okay? So the people of Athens basically regarded sophists much the way people in our society very often regard lawyers. I don't trust them, they're wicked, they're dishonest. Boy, I wish I could do what they do, though, because they are so successful and they are so street smart. So, okay, back to Socrates and the sophists. Socrates calls himself a philosopher. Not a wise man, but a philosopher. Philosopher literally means lover of wisdom. Not someone with a particular academic degree or someone with particular training or someone with a particular profession. Socrates himself worked as a tinker and a sandal maker. But someone who loves wisdom and lets that love of wisdom guide his conduct and his life. Okay? It is because Socrates regarded himself as a lover of wisdom that he refused to call himself a wise man. He said, if I have any wisdom at all, it is only that I understand the limits of what I know, and I don't pretend to know what I don't know. So now consider the situation Socrates is in after he hears what the Delphic oracle said. No man is wiser than Socrates. That is essentially telling him that the educational system, the legal system, the political system of Athens is in the hands of frauds and charlatans who claim to be wise but don't know what they are doing and probably only in it for their own profit. This is the future of Athens. Socrates is a very patriotic fellow. He was decorated for bravery in the Peloponnesian Wars, the wars between Athens and Sparta. He has many times risked his life for Athens. There was a temporary coup that seized control of Athens at one point, and Socrates absolutely refused to cooperate. His life was on the line. He could have been arrested and executed at any time, but he simply refused to cooperate. That particular episode in the life of Socrates has been pointed to by Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, Henry David Thoreau, Leo Tolstoy, and others as the invention of nonviolent non-cooperation as a means of social change. So Socrates is willing to walk the talk. What's he going to do now? He can't sit on this. If he thinks that these destructive elements are in control of Athens, he can't just sit on this. He's got to do something. So he decides, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to publicly question these sophists. I'm not going to claim they don't know what they're talking about, because then I would have to claim that, I know more than they do, and I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just going to question them. If they claim I know how the government should be run, if they claim I know what the gods want from us, if they claim I know what knowledge is, I know what piety is, I know what whatever is, I'm going to ask them, well, okay, explain it to me. And they will have to publicly try to explain themselves. I will continue to ask them questions. If they are in any way unclear or presumptuous or evasive, I will continue to ask them questions until it either becomes clear they know what they're talking about or they don't know what they're talking about. And I suspect it'll be the latter, that it'll turn out they don't know what they're talking about. And they will convict themselves out of their own mouths in front of everybody. So the word will be out. Indeed, the word was out. And these aristocratic young men whose fathers were paying lots of good money to the sophists began saying, why is my dad paying money to this guy when Socrates just took him apart for free? I can go in the marketplace and hang around and talk with Socrates for free and learn more than I'm learning from this sophist. Not only that, Socrates seems to have much more integrity than these sophists. I don't want to be like this guy, I want to be like Socrates. So the sophists were losing their reputations and they were losing their revenues because of Socrates. And Socrates was not doing this to be a smart aleck. He was doing this because he thought the future of Athens really depended upon this. It depended upon these young people who he didn't want to see seduced away to unworthy ends by people who didn't care. So, as you might imagine, he made many good friends who regarded him as a heroic figure. And he also made very powerful and well-connected enemies. Eventually, he was charged with corrupting the youth of Athens, with impiety, largely trumped-up charges based on very old laws, what we would call blue laws, laws that just generally even weren't enforced anymore, and tried, almost acquitted, and eventually executed. He had many chances to escape from Athens. Rather than face the music, he preferred to stand his ground, not to compromise his beliefs, not to compromise his values, but to stand his ground even if that cost his life. And indeed, we have gained immeasurably from his example and from the work that he did. So that is the backstory. Socrates is generally credited with not only essentially inventing scientific method, right? You take this hypothetical, make a hypothesis, test it, revise it, so forth, method that Socrates used that I already described. Add to that Plato's notion that mathematics is the language of nature. Put those two together and essentially you have historically the foundations of modern science. Also, his method of questioning, the sophists, is historically the foundation of what we call cross-examination in our courts of law. And indeed, if you go to law school, they will call it, when you learn cross-examination, they actually call that Socratic method, although there's more to Socratic method than just cross-examination. So, this is the backstory for what Socrates is all about, what he's doing, why he's doing it, who he is. And he, in the first passage you're going to read, he is talking with the two elder brothers of Plato, Adeimantus and Glaucon. And Adeimantus asks him, why is it if philosophy is so useful, potentially so noble an endeavor, why is it that average Joe and Jane Toga on the street think that philosophers are either useless or dangerous? Socrates says, well, I don't know that I necessarily disagree with that. Okay? And that is the point at which we will begin the next video.